Hello, welcome back to video 11 of our evaluation series. And in this video, we're going to jump right into the Active Directory external authentication. And in this particular topic, we need to do a few things, set up a few policies. So go ahead and set up a couple of roles that will map into our membership in the AD. And then we've got some scripts that we use for the external authentication. So what I'm going to do here, I don't like to pull up slides a whole lot, but I'm going to anyway. So what we have is in these policies, there's a number of ways that we can deal with both the defaults for administrators who do not have any type of membership or any kind of explicit permission set. And then we have the ability to deal with what we call the master users or super users. And by default, they use a local login, and this enables them to effectively externally authenticate for those master users. Now, I have a caution for everyone that there are default users. They're there because they have privileges, and if you need those privileges, you might just simply want to, obscure the password, protect it, and then only users that log in are audited, etc., and you still have that user. But if you rely on everybody being externally authenticated and they're all primaries, and all of a sudden Active Directory goes down or the network goes down, those users aren't going to be able to log in. So you'll need a local login, at least one, to have that control. Now, aside from that there are other policies that dictate whether they're going to be externally created. So we have this great process now that instead of you having to go in and import or create the administrators, just set up the membership, allow them to log in, we do the checks, and if everything looks good, we create the administrator and assign them to a role. Very simple process. And as they go from role to role, we should be able to reflect that difference in IPControl every time they log in and log out. So the settings we'll deal with there are the create externally authenticated administrators, which we will. The default role is what we'll set for everyone that's read-only. It'll be a read-only role. You can log in and see it, but that's all. Then we have our external authentication script, which I'm going to put mine in a different location, which I actually recommend in the next slide here. But we're also going to store the password locally for this purpose. But going back to those master users, if they can't authenticate to the AD and you have a local password, you can still enable local login. So that is really what that option is going to be valid for. And then as we go through this, we're going to test it. So there's an online test of the authentication to get the success failure status. Now the roles we need to set up obviously before we create the administrators, and we should have some type of mapping between the role or membership in Active Directory and what we're going to tie it back to in IPControl. So I have a couple of examples which I use, one read-only, normal, and administrator. Now the read-only is the default. That's our default role, and everybody gets that until they're authenticated and move to a different role through the authentication. And then I have a normal administrator, which is going to inherit different roles or permissions, and then a admin level, which is the super user or equivalent. Now the scripts, we have one specifically for Microsoft Active Directory. We have one for LDAP, and we have one for TACACS. So you can use any one of those different sources, but the MSAD has the domain memberships. That's why we're doing this here. And we use basically the modules built into the appliances from cPants. We build everything necessary. You shouldn't have to install any third-party software. But mentioning third-party, under the opt-in control directory, you can create a folder called third-party, and you can put your custom scripts, text, anything you need in there. And as we do upgrades, we'll move that file or we'll persist that folder to the new upgraded system as it does a refresh. So key to do, and I'm going to put mine in there. And then kind of lastly here, I think we're going to have some ability to test, and I'll show you what that output looks like on the command line or shell. And it basically is a standard in, which means it waits for input and an enter. Input, enter, input, enter. Waits for 3 of those, and then it proceeds through the script. Now I'm gonna just touch on the different points of the script, but I'm gonna pull up an active one here and show you my configuration. So to begin with, we use NetLDAP, which is already pre-installed. And when you define your AD server, either by its fully qualified name or its IP address, if you want to use anything other than 389, like LDAP-S, you put :636 in its IP. But then we need to specify your AD domain for the user authenticating and its base DC, which would be effectively the domain structure, DC down through that com. And then when you look at the external script, when we return the values, we're going to compare the user. We're going to set the defaults to read-only, and we're going to set the admin role to read-only. Excuse me. Then we'll set LDAP-S, which I'm going to use again in mine. And then what we're doing with this is we set a filter that checks for the same account name of the user and then pulls back all of the attributes, which we then loop through, finding all of the groups. So we'll have different group names that we're going to compare that will set the admin type and the admin role based on that match. And then we'll have on the command line, I mentioned the test. This will give us kind of an output of what that test looks like, and then on the screen test. And then lastly, if we see any errors, we can pretty much say that there's something in the script, which is why we would go back to this function to test it to see if there's any reported Perl errors or anything along those lines. So let's go ahead and drop that out of there, and let's go ahead and do a couple things first. So the first thing is you want to go ahead and establish at least those 4 different roles if that's how you're going to outline this. So I have my default role, my IPC underscore admin, IPC underscore normal, and IPC underscore read only. Each one of these roles has policies. I have not set these yet. We're going to come back at maybe another video or something just to set these. But to see what we have here, it is based on the menu items first, enabling, disabling functionality based on these checkboxes, access controls, which is based on the container. So you can go and define, here is your level of access. You can inherit this beneath you in any kind of child container structure, and we can set whether it's read, write, delete at any level. You can further add blocks here so that if you wanted to have something going on with networks, you could say, I can give you access to the network, but that's all I'm going to provide. To that level there. Right? Now the block type access, we get down into the different block types. So we can go through those policies and enable, when you deal with subnets, what type of subnet can you see, manage, and what sizes are applicable to you for the CIDR prefix. What device types can you access and manage. So if you wanted a, say a DHCP team and all of their devices were PCs, workstations, you might disable switches, routers, servers, if they're not responsible for those assignments. The policies are very important in terms of when we get to the CLIs and also for host name and MAC address, duplicate MAC address checkings. So the default access for a user is web UI only, and a read only you would typically do that. If you needed this user to have CLI or API access, you would need to enable the CLI, which represents both. You can also then set up your checks to ignore, warn, or fail, and we can do it by host name or fully qualified, and then we can check for host name, MAC addresses, and quad A checks. The domain access, you can set internal, external, and we can add to these domains at any level from there. And then getting down to the network services and others. So we can get down to some very granular access rights and enabling, disabling any type of permission. Okay. I don't have access to do this in this permissions. I'm a test admin, and it doesn't allow me. Okay. So let's go ahead and do one thing. We need to make sure we're in here as Inc admin before you start creating things. And then in those roles. So once we get a little further down the road, we understand how our data is going to be laid out, with the exception of the read-only, which we can set as a flag. This is how we're going to basically create the default structure for administrators. Okay. The policies and options are where we're going to go ahead and set all of those policies. Now, the first one we want to look at is the allow external or allow masters to externally authenticate. And it is somewhat hard to see these sometimes, so you have to kind of look around here. While we're here too, though, for host names, for DNS, we might want to go ahead and allow underscores in the host names if you're doing that. And I still can't find my administrator. Allow admins of type. Okay. Allow admins of type to be externally mastered. So I had already set this. So we want this to be set to yes. We then want to go down to the external authentication where it says to create externally authenticated administrators. It will be no. Let's change it to yes. We created a default role, which will be set as default role for all administrators. So once you're created, this is your default role until you're explicitly changed or authenticate. Now here is where we're going to specify our authentication script. So I have user bin Perl, which is how we want to call it for the interpreter, and then opt and control third party auth, and then the exe auth msadpl. So this will require that you copy this script to and create a third party auth and then copy the script to that folder. And you can do that through WinSCP or you can do that through shell. But I'll show you what that content looks like, and we just want to duplicate that. The externally stored password is the last setting that was there, and we can set that to yes and handle those policies. So I'm going to go ahead and just submit this to save it. And then if we go take a look at our administrative roles, make sure everything there is right, let's go ahead and pull up our script and start taking a look at its values. One sec. Okay, now I have gone through a couple iterations of this script, and as you'll see, I've modified and edited it. And we do enclose some base scripts with the application, but I found that it's better off to ask. So ask me and I'll provide you a script that'll work for Active Directory versus having to go in and kind of modify the default scripts, because there are a few changes that would be made. So the first thing is I just want to kind of point out, again, we had the input happening for the user password product. So when a user authenticates to IPControl, they enter that user password. We on the back end pass it through the web service to this calling API and the shell script that waits for the input. So it's waits for input enter, which is the standard input enter, input enter. I'm then going to quote this. So I know there's a lot of characters out there that use special characters and things. So I always quote my passwords just to make sure they're syntactically correct or going to work. And then when we get to your AD server, if you're using LDAP-S, you should use 636, or you can leave it empty or specify 389 for the defaults. Specify your domain name, and I put a trailing dot so it doesn't try to append any kind of prefixes or suffixes. And then the AD base. And then I have a couple of empty variables because I'm then going to allow you to specify on the authentication line a domain / username. So if I see that, I'm going to split it and parse it accordingly, or I'm going to use a default, which we're going to set up in the AD domain here. The return user then is just what we're going to change based on this user setting, and then we have the defaults for the group. Now, here we're doing admin type read-only, and the default here admin type is read-only, and I could set this to default role actually to tell it to use the default that we specified. Here at the AD lines where the LDAP-S is, if you are specifying that you're using 636, you need to change this from LDAP to LDAP-S, just so you know. And then as we go down through the bind user, I'm binding to the domain with that user. Then go out and we do a search of the attributes. And in those attributes, we're specifically looking for the SAM account name matches this user, and to pull back all of the adders that includes the group names. We then parse through the member of, pull out the groups, and then compare the group name to the various roles that we're going to define. If it matches a role, it sets the admin type, and the admin type matches either normal, read-only, or master. And then we go through the admin role, which tells it which role in IPControl to map to based on its permissions. So we have here everything we need. Actually, I'm going to change this down here to, well, we'll just keep that to super user, which works well. All right, and then at the very end of the script, if it is successful, we print success. And the authentication portion expects to see success or failure, 0 or 1, basically. We return the user back to the script, and then we return a type and role if they're available so that we can auto-create, which is required. And lastly, it'll fail and tell you that it failed the credentials and so on. So now this is not something I'm going to expect that you're going to have right out of this script to be able to duplicate all of this. So I'm going to do two things. I'm going to just take a stop here and maybe let you screen cap. And we're going to scroll down just a little bit further to this line and let you screen cap. And you shouldn't have to make any changes here. The only change that we'd be looking at here is this. And then our group names that we would map up here. So I know there's not, everyone doesn't understand Perl. And again, if you need assistance with this, let us know and we'll work with you to get your groups and get everything set up. Now, I want to go test this. So now that we have our script, go ahead and save it. And let's go up to our tools, system policies, and let's just start here and see what we have. And this is our test, and here we'll just do our test admin again. All right, and I have success. So that tells me that we're connecting to the AD, the password's accepted, everything's working. Now I'm going to do this from a shell because I want to see a little bit more detail about what's happening there. So I'm going to do Perl, run my script, should get some empty lines, and I'm going to do a test admin. Now remember, this echoes the password, so don't do this around a bunch of people if you expect to keep a secret. Now you'll see here that we have then success, the user, and then because it found the group, it returned the group information. So my user is currently in that read-only group. So let's go ahead and take them out, and we can see this. And I'm going to go ahead and add them to IPC admin. Well, let's do normal first. Try that again. I wonder why that's not working for me. 1 second here. Because I'm not typing it right. So it's IPC underscore normal, which is what I'm going to apply. So I'm going to do that now, and then minimize that, and then I'm going to rerun this again with the test admin. Same password and just IPC any word. Okay, so now you can see that as we change this user, and what I expect is happening here, that when we move that user to a different group membership, it should also move that user on the next authentication. And when it auto creates the administrator, it sets a flag that maintains this setting external. All right, so let's go ahead and do this. And we just go ahead and delete this administrator because I had done this previously. I had to restart my video. So let's go ahead and delete this, and let's retry again here. I'm going to log out. I'm going to log back in as test admin, password. And the very... no admin roles were provided. Let's see what we've got here. Okay, these underscores are getting me today, so I need to do one other change here and highlight something that I put a hyphen instead of an underscore. So we need to correct this real quick. Let's go back to our script. Let me edit this. Let's go back down to our user. That's not the one. Let's go up, third party, refresh. Okay, now we'll do IPC normal. We got default role. Now we could set this to IPC read only as well, which we'll do just to ensure that we have this. And I think I had IP admin, so we're going to do this as well. No, we're going to keep that super user since those are the admins there. All right, let's try that one more time. Make sure you have everything spelled right. And on that first login now, we have our administrators created. And if I go look at the administrator section now, I'm going to see here that I have IPC normal as the role. Now I'm going to log out of here just so we can see it. I'm going to take this out again. I'm going to add IPC read only, apply, and let's do this again. And what I expect to see is that if I look at that role again, I'm going to see read only. And then if I do a third one here, I should be able to see the admin, super user. All right, so there's our read only. So let's go ahead and do one more. And just make sure everybody's happy there. And IPC admin. And let's see what we have here. All right, and now we have back to super user. So with all that said and done, everything now is working as expected, and the administrators logging in, they're getting their permissions set, and they should then be able to do everything they need to within their access controls. So I want to show you one more thing on the users real quick before we finish this video. And in the administrators now, when we've created this, you'll see, not under the role, under the definition, under our test admin now, there's a couple of checkboxes to note. The authorized externally is the AD authentication. We have one global system, one global authentication source. It's either password, local, or externally. So when you enable this, they automatically use the external. The role and type managed externally is because we created the administrator, they didn't exist, we had a role and we had a type, so we created the user by permission. And so when it does that, it checks this box to tell it how its permissions are set. As you saw when we moved around, this is what was controlling that. And then if we wanted to disable this administrator, we could. Now there's a number of other things here for the administrator, like require two-form factor authentication. We've got SAML authentication. We have Okta authentication. And so we have a number of other different ways of doing authentication in this application that you can go in and define your auth providers. You can do others and specify those sources. But what I want to show you, which we can control directly, because I honestly don't have an auth provider for these to test it here directly. I have to come up with another video for that. But from an Active Directory standpoint, we should be good to help you with the administrators. And then you can just add your users to the groups, and those who need read-only and access, put them into the read-only group. So that was our authentication, and now you can kind of set your users up and work with them. And at this point, you might want to set up your own user, set it up as an administrator, and then you might want to change the password of IncAdmin at that point, just to kind of lock things down. Or don't, so as we run through these other videos, you won't have to remember it. So until we get done with it, wait till we change it there. Anyway, thank you again for joining, and I hope you learned something on the Active Directory authentication and auto group and user, and we'll be back in the next video, kind of tighten up some of these last bit of features, and we're going to move on to some automation and APIs in the next couple of videos. Thank you. Talk to you soon.